I wanted to do a video about the current state of the heavyweight division and the current heavyweight rankings. I think I was keen to put a few thoughts down on this one, as the way that I have the division differs to how some of the governing bodies have the division in terms of rankings. Possibly differs slightly to how BoxRec have got the division listed, and I really thought it was quite an interesting topic to see how people thought different contenders should be ranked and listed. So I was keen to put a few thoughts down on the sort of heavyweight top 10. Just before I get started on that, I wanted to mention very briefly three fighters who were near misses, three names who you may expect to see on the rankings list, but for one reason or another that I'll touch on, haven't made it. The first one was David Haye, someone I'm a big fan of. I've seen him fight live, I've followed his career for many years, and I do believe that David Haye at his best is at the very top of the tree in the heavyweight division, certainly a top 5 heavyweight, and I certainly believe that David Haye in peak form would beat some of the fighters I've listed in the top 10. However, I haven't included him as a top 10 ranked heavyweight for one major reason, which is inactivity. The guy hasn't been in the ring for about 2.5 years. He hasn't got any fights scheduled, and I think it's not correct to have him as a ranked heavyweight given that. So David Haye misses out. Ruslan Chagayev, the WBA regular title holder, also misses out. Perhaps strange not to have one of the main belt holders, not the main belt holders, but one of the belt holders within the division not listed in the top 10, but I really don't think, the guy is of top 10 standard. I haven't been impressed by him in the fights I've watched of his. Even when he won the belt against Quendo, I saw him as a somewhat limited fighter, quite one-dimensional coming forward, not overly skilled, not overly agile, and I think he's someone who can be beaten by any heavyweights out there at the top of the tree who fancy their chances at taking a WBA regular belt. I mean, if we look at when he stepped up in opposition, certainly on occasion, the likes of when he fought Klitschko and Povetkin, he lost those fights, and I think he's just outside the top 10 despite having that belt. It's not a belt I expect him to hold on to throughout 2015. The third heavyweight I just thought worth mentioning, missing out on the list, is Derek Chisora. I like Chisora's activity. I think he's there or thereabouts, but put simply, whenever he's stepped up and fought someone who is a top 10 rated heavyweight, he's lost. Got stopped by Haye, beaten by Vitaly Klitschko, who you would have said was top of the tree when they fought. Got beaten by Tyson Fury, got beaten by Robert Helenius. So I think whilst he's been impressive with his activity, and he's had some decent wins against the likes of Andre Parla and Malik Scott, he's not quite there in terms of a top 10 rated heavyweight at this point. So he doesn't make the list. I think if realistically he gets a win over a Tyson Fury or one of those type of fighters, he could certainly make his way into the list. But at this point, I just don't see a sort of marquee name on his record that means I could put him as a top 10 heavyweight. On to the actual guys who've made the list. At number 10, I've got Tony the Tiger Thompson. Big fan of his. In terms of the names he's beaten recently, you're looking at David Price and Odliner Solis. Solis was particularly impressive. I thought that he'd lose that fight, really. I thought age was against him, and I thought realistically Solis had too much talent, too much going for him to allow an aging Tony Thompson to win. But Thompson showed a lot of class, and so why he's been near the top of the heavyweight division for so long. I think he's very much become the gatekeeper of the division, and although he has lost fights recently to Carlos Takam and also to Kubrat Pulev, he looked good in both of those fights at times, and certainly I scored in the first few rounds in the Pulev fight. There were times in the Cam fight he appeared, to my eye at least, to be the classier fighter. So I've put Tony at number 10. I think with his age and with his sort of CV already, it's unlikely that he's going to go much higher up the rankings going forward. But I think with his victories over the last year or two, it would be remiss not to have him on that list. Certainly, I think he's beaten a higher calibre of opposition than, say, a Chisora or a Chegaev, and that's why I've included him. At number 9, perhaps not surprisingly, I've got Carlos Takam. Obviously, I've put Thompson at 10, and I think Takam certainly did beat him when they fought. I thought Takam was impressive. It was a fight that I previously thought Thompson would win, but Takam did impress me. He was the younger, stronger, fitter man, and put on relentless pressure and won, clear decision. He drew against Mike Perez, which I also thought was pretty good form. Obviously, Perez has lost recently to Bryant Jennings, but I've been a fan of Perez, and I was impressed how Takam did in that fight. He's not higher than 9 at this point because there were spells in both the Perez fight and in the Thompson fight where I thought the other fighter showed they had slightly more class and sort of gave an indication that a real sort of top level, top 5 heavyweight could expose Takam. And I think Takam needs 1 or 2 more names on his record before going for belts. However, he has got a fight scheduled against Alexander Povetkin, and that's exactly the kind of fight the division needs, and exactly the kind of fight that I'm excited to see. So that's a big fight, and if Takam can win against Povetkin, which I doubt, he will undoubtedly be near the top of the heavyweight tree. So Takam at number 9. I've got Bryant Jennings at number 8. Obviously, Takam drew with Perez. Jennings beat him. Jennings again is someone who perhaps needs a slightly more marquee name on his record. I was impressed by his win over the Polish fighter Offa Spitka, and also over Mike Perez. He is now in a position where he's won a WBC eliminator, and we expect him to fight the winner of the main Stavern versus Deontay Wilder. So that'll be a very interesting fight when that comes through. Jennings, I don't see him as the biggest puncher in the division, but he's a really good mover, throws some nice shots. He's not one of these heavyweight plodders, if you like, and he's got a lot of class to the way he moves and the way he fights. So he's someone I enjoy watching, and someone I'd like to see in a big fight going forward. He's got a lot of potential. At number 7, perhaps slightly controversially, I'm listing a guy who really doesn't have the record in terms of the type of heavyweights he's beaten. I admit that this fighter does need to step up the level of opposition, and that's Luis Ortiz, who is now the WBA interim champion after his first round KO victory last week against Latif Kayode. Ortiz is someone I've been following for quite a while, and he's someone I view as a real threat to the division. On the negative side, he's 35, which means he's got to be moved very quickly. But on the positive side, he's got a huge amount going for him. He's clearly a massive puncher. His movement's good. He's had a huge amateur pedigree. I think he's had 350 amateur fights when he was fighting for Cuba in the amateurs, and he's someone I view as a real threat. I believe he's going to be fighting Ruslan Chagaev in 2015 for the WBA regular belt, and assuming he wins that, which you'd have to take him to, potentially set up a match with WBA super champion Klitschko, and I think Ortiz has real potential. For those who haven't seen him, I recommend watching him on YouTube. I think the unfortunate thing about him is his record just, he's unbeaten, but he hasn't fought the quality of fighter necessary. His most recent fight was a huge setup in Latif Kayode. Before him, the biggest name on his record was a very faded Monty Barrett, and if you look back 5 or 6 fights ago, he was fighting guys on debut, he was fighting guys who are having a huge losing record. So level of opposition needs to be stepped up. This ranking I'm giving purely based on ability and potential. I agree, perhaps unfair of me maybe not to put someone like Chisora in, saying he hasn't fought the level of opposition, when then I'm going to put someone like Ortiz in. But I think if you look at Ortiz, you can see that the potential that this guy has is really world class, and in my opinion he's probably the most exciting talent in the division at present. Number 6, I've got Kubrat Pulev. Pulev is a fighter who has never really excited me. I see him as sort of someone who's got a good jab, but not the most power compared to other heavyweights in the division. I expect him to be soundly beaten by Vladimir Klitschko when they fight. And if you look at his record, he's beaten Tony Thompson, which is the main reason I've got him so high in the rankings. He's beaten like a reasonable calibre of opposition, the likes of Ustinov, Dimitrenko. These are solid guys. So he deserves his place in the rankings based on who he's beaten. But I think Pulev will get found out now he's moving up to fight Klitschko in that level of fighter. I think he lacks power. You look at fighters like Travis Walker, who went the distance with him. I think Michael Scott survived something like 9 rounds against him, and he seems to lack variety to his game. From my perspective, he's just a jabber. I would like to be proved wrong, and I'll await with interest to see whether that will happen. But I need to see more variety and more sort of explosiveness from Pulev before I rate him higher up in this list. So he's at number 6, respectable ranking. He's beaten respectable guys, so he deserves his place. And obviously he's got his chance coming up next, so we'll see just how good he is. Number 5, Deontay Wilder. He gets a lot of stick for the opposition he's been in against. The opposition has got slightly better of late, not in his last fight, but Malik Scott is a solid top 25 operator, I guess you could say. And Deontay Wilder sort of did a pretty quick job on him. Obviously, apart from Malik Scott, you're looking at Audley Harrison probably as his second best fight, which isn't much of a pedigree for the top level. But he's now in a position where he's done what he needs to do, and he's going to have a very big fight against Bermane Stiverne next time out. I see that as a really tough fight for call. I can see huge reasons why both guys would win the fight, and it's really very hard to make a decision on who I think is going to win that fight. Obviously, Deontay Wilder's got a massive right hand. I think my 2 concerns about him are how will he react when he gets hit by a real top level fighter like Stiverne, who carries a lot of power. I know he's had, Deontay's been dropped by someone in the pros, I guess you could say a journeyman, a club fighter in America. I think he had chin problems in the amateurs, and you just wonder how that will hold up against someone like Stiverne. When I've seen him fight, he looks slightly rigid, slightly robotic. The way he piles in, if you look at the way he piled in against Audley after landing that big punch, you wonder if he's up against a serious operator, whether he's going to get caught and leave himself open. If you look at the sparring footage against David Haye, he looks like he's flailing all over the place, and he looks really sort of robotic and rigid, and he doesn't look like a sort of truly classy fighter. And I wonder whether he'll get exposed against the likes of a Stiverne. Nonetheless, he's on the list because of his frightening punching power. I think he's on 32 fights now, won them all by knockout, so enough respect for that, and that's why he's deserves his place on the list. He's certainly an exciting fighter to watch, so can't complain. Number 4, you've got Alexander Povetkin. Povetkin's been in with some decent opposition. Faded Hashim Ratman, Marco Huck. He impressively knocked out Manuel Char in their last fight, so he's someone I'm a fan of. Great fight coming up against Carlos Takam. That's a fight I see him winning, but Povetkin really is a top level heavyweight. I was really impressed by the way he took care of business with Char. Obviously, whatever people say about the Klitschko fight, too much holding, dishonest tactics, he was soundly beaten. Klitschko won nearly every round in that fight, and whether Klitschko shouldn't have held or not, you can't really see Povetkin beating him, so he's slightly away from the top of the division. But I do believe Povetkin really is a top-level fighter, and I think the gulfing class between Klitschko and all the rest was probably evident from that fight. Nevertheless, with Povetkin's record and what he brings to the table, he's still very much at the top of the tree, and I expect him to cement his ranking by beating Carlos Takam when they square off late October. Number 3, I've got Bermane Stiverne. I was so impressed with Stiverne, how he took care of business with Ariola in both fights. The guy has got real punching power. The way he punches doesn't look as explosive as a Deontay Wilder knockout, but the way he dropped Areola in both fights and finished him in the second showed that this guy really is one of the biggest punchers in the division. The way he moves, the way he throws combinations, his hand speed, his jab, I really like it. He's got a massive fight coming up against Deontay Wilder. The winner of that is taking on Bryant Jennings. So I expect a really busy 2015 for Stavern with some real big fights. Hopefully, if he can take care of business with those guys, we can see a big fight between him and Klitschko. But Stavern's a very exciting fighter, one who I enjoy watching, and definitely deserves his place in the rankings. At number 2, I've got perhaps the most controversial pick of my top 10. Sorry. Tyson Fury. I'm a massive fan of Fury. Been following him for years, and I think he really is a very dangerous fighter. I think the size he brings, the way he moves for a big heavyweight, sort of his technical ability with his jab and his footwork, his inside game given his height, is really impressive. Who he's beaten Derek Chisora. He beat Derek Chisora quite comfortably, in my opinion. He's beaten Steve Cunningham. You could say Steve Cunningham's nothing but a cruiserweight, but I was impressed by the way Cunningham dealt with Amir Mansour last time out. I was really impressed with Fury. The other thing that is easy to forget about Fury is just how young he is. I think he's 25 years old, which for a man of his height and sort of physique is very young. If you think how young he was when he took the first Chisora fight, it's frightening. I mean, the guy's got punching power, he's got movement, he's got an inside game and outside game. People question his chin, but he's been hurt in fights and never been stopped. He's a real talent, and I think with his size, with his jab, sometimes when you see him throw like a double jab or a jab hook combination, you think this is a guy with real class. He's not just like a brawler or someone who throws madly. He's a guy with real class, and if he can get himself in shape, I really do see him as a future world champion. I think with his size, he's got scope to give Klitschko problems, probably more so than anyone else in the division. And I think previously, when you've seen really big men like Nikolai Valuev or these kind of guys, they turn into a bit sort of one-dimensional plodders. Fury isn't that. He can move, he can throw lovely combinations, and I think he's a real danger. I do have him beating the likes of Stavern, Povetkin, Pulev. That's why I've rated him so highly. There isn't, a top 5 name on his record. There just isn't. But, cancelled fights against David Haye, both times the fault of the opponent rather than Fury himself. He's put himself in a position to get these big fights, and he's just been very unlucky. I expect Fury to take care of business and to beat Chisora when they fight later on this year. And I look for some really big fights for Fury in 2015. My understanding is the Chisora 2 fight is going to be still a WBO final eliminator, which puts him in prime spot to fight Vladimir, and I expect very big things to come from Fury. Number 1 in the division, almost goes without saying, is Vladimir Klitschko. If you look at the way he's beaten Tony Thompson twice, he's made the list. He's beaten Povetkin. There's a lot of complaints about his tactics in that fight, but won pretty much every round. Beat David Haye comfortably. Yes, he has taken some easier defences. I think John Mark Mormek is the obvious one. Leah Pye. The list goes on. But in terms of who he's beaten, there's nobody else in the heavyweight division who you can compare records with to Vladimir Klitschko. He is number 1 in the division. I expect him to soundly beat Pulev when they fight. There are some guys I think could cause him problems. Luis Ortiz, maybe Deontay Wilder with his punching power. Bermane Stavern and Fury, both interesting fights, but the guy is clearly king of the castle at the minute and has to be top of the tree. I'm interested to hear people's thoughts on my rankings. I'm sure Fury at 2, Ortiz at 7, will raise a few eyebrows perhaps, but I'm interested to hear what orders people would have their top lists in, who maybe I've missed out that I should have put in the top 10. And I'm always keen to hear feedback on the videos in general, so please do feel free to comment and subscribe. I'll be putting up some more stuff. I'll do some other top 10s in the next few days. I think there's a few other really interesting divisions out there, welterweight, super middleweight. There's a few ones where there's so many big names that these are interesting to get down, so interested to see what people think.